Hello and welcome. My name is Eddie. I'm going to be taking you through backend development and what all of that has to offer for us. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So we're here in chapter 1, setting up the development environment. We'll take a look at our main objectives for this section. It's going to be pretty straightforward. So two big ones here. We're going to take a look at what it takes to develop for Liferay, and we're going to take a look at how to set up our various tools to develop for Liferay. So very easy, very straightforward in regards to what our big objectives are going to be. Let's take a look at what does it take to set up our development environment, and what sort of choices and options do we have. So first and foremost, Liferay is tool agnostic. What that means is, for the most part, Liferay doesn't really have a set of tools that we require or we make mandatory. We offer a wide range of different tools, different technologies that you can use to develop for Liferay. There's only going to be a couple of hard requirements that we need. The first one is going to be a full Java JDK. As I'm talking to you right now, it's JDK 8. So we need that not only to develop for Liferay, but also to run Liferay as well. Right. Liferay does offer an IDE, and it comes in two separate flavors. We'll talk about that soon. And the next hard requirement is going to be a servlet container to run Liferay, and then some sort of database to store all of the data that Liferay is going to create. So JDK, servlet container, database. Those are kind of the three big things. Everything else in between is kind of up to you. So we'll talk about some of those pretty soon. So let's first talk about Liferay's IDE. It's called Liferay Dev Studio, and it comes in two different flavors. The first one is DXP. So this is our commercial, our enterprise version of Eclipse, basically. So we have a bunch of different plugins that are integrated into Eclipse that allow for Liferay development. Right. Alongside of that, Liferay Developer Studio will also download a bundled version of Liferay, whether the enterprise or the community edition depends on which version of Liferay Developer Studio we have. So with Dev Studio DXP, Liferay DXP is going to be downloaded, and we're going to connect it to the IDE. Contrast that to the community edition of Dev Studio. This is our open source version. It's going to be built just like DXP with a bunch of different plugins. These plugins can actually be downloaded separately and then integrated into standalone Eclipse. So if you have all of your configurations in Eclipse, but you don't want to lose them, right, you can just download those plugins and you'll be good to go. Again, the main difference between Community Edition and DXP is which version of Liferay are we going to be installing and connecting to. So Community Edition, right, downloads the Community Edition bundle of Liferay. DXP downloads the DXP version. Okay, so we do have a link there. We'll provide the links for you as well to download Liferay IDE. All right, so the Plugins SDK. We still need to mention this even though this is legacy. The Plugins SDK was used back in the day to develop many of our applications, many of our plugins. But as of Liferay 7.0, it's technically deprecated. So if you're coming from previous versions and you're trying to upgrade to the most current version, this is where the Plugins SDK is going to take a role. If you want to develop these things called EXT plugins, most of the time you don't, but if you do, that's what the Plugins SDK is for. And EXT plugins are also technically deprecated. So if you're coming from the past, the Plugins SDK may have a role in your Liferay development. But if you're starting brand new here in Liferay 7.1, then Plugins SDK doesn't really have much of a factor in what you'll be doing. So again, just for those coming from previous versions. Now, other IDEs. Since we are tool agnostic, we're not locking you down into a Eclipse-based IDE. In fact, Liferay does have a plugin for IntelliJ as well. We know there's this sort of war between Eclipse and IntelliJ as to which one is better. You and I both know which one is the better one, so we don't need to have that argument. But if you do want to use IntelliJ, right, we do have the plugin that allows you to develop for Liferay within IntelliJ. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, when dealing with JDKs, right, there's a couple of different vendors that provide a JDK. If you had to pick one, we at Liferay recommend the Oracle Java JDK, since they are kind of the official vendors. Again, this kind of depends where we're coming from. When we're talking about servlet containers or app servers or Java EE servers, depending on what we want to call them, Liferay does have what we call Liferay bundles. This is Liferay packaged together with a specific app server. So we have two different Liferay bundles, one for Tomcat, the other for Wildfly. When we're working with Liferay's IDE, they're always going to give us a Liferay Tomcat bundle and provide the mechanism to connect to it. So that's what we prefer, that's what we use. But again, we are tool agnostic. So if you want to use a different one, a different servlet container, you can. Overall at the database, Liferay comes packaged with a file system based database called Hypersonic. This is just meant to kind of play around for development, kind of for testing. But when we want to do more real development or hit production, we're going to be using an SQL database like MySQL, Postgres, or anything in between. When we are connecting to these different SQL databases, we're going to want a JDBC connector. Liferay most of the time isn't going to give that to us, so be sure you get yours when you decide which database to use. And so we mentioned a couple of popular names out there, and maybe I didn't mention something that you may want to use, right? Whether it's a specific database or app server. This is where the compatibility matrix is going to come into play. Anything that's on this matrix is fair game, whether it's on the supported side or the certified side. As long as you see what you want to use here, then feel free to use it. Now, if you're kind of in a debate between one over the other, if possible, try to use what's on the certified section. This is more so what we at Liferay prefer, but of course, what's on supported is just that, supported. So as long as you have that somewhere here, then we're good to go. So let's take a look at our development structure as we talked about those different aspects. So in the foundation, we need a Java JDK, whichever version number is applicable during the time that you are installing Liferay. We will use Dev Studio in our situation, and Developer Studio is going to connect to a Liferay Tomcat bundle, right? The connector behind the scenes is already taken care of. The Liferay instance or the Liferay bundle is also going to connect to an SQL database. So we'll have a JDBC connector to help us out with that. Okay, so this is what a typical development environment kind of looks like when we add some of the names there. But that's not the only way, right? We'll take a look at a couple of different situations for our tooling scenarios. So maybe you're the minimalist, right? You just have a JDK all ready to go. You open up your favorite text editor like VI or Emacs, and then once you have all of your code ready to go, you use a build tool like Maven to get it all packaged and compiled nicely, ready to deploy into Liferay. That's perfectly fine. No issues there. On a more typical, you still have your JDK and you have your favorite IDE, such as Liferay Dev Studio, pulling in code from Git or GitHub. Right? We have the Liferay Tomcat bundled integrated within Liferay Developer Studio, so we can very easily deploy to Liferay. Liferay is also connected to an SQL database, so it makes it a little bit easier for us to kind of take a look inside the database. And finally, we have something more advanced, right? We take the typical and we add a couple of different tools to help us out, help us monitor what's going on within Liferay help us monitor what's going on over in the database, right? Making sure all of our code is up to date and so on. So this is the advanced. So whichever flavor works for you, right? Works for you, right? We are, again, tool agnostic. So whatever sort of tools you are most comfortable with, for the most part, we say, yeah, go for it. But let's go ahead and set up the development environment over here on my laptop.